Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Terry. I was asked to say a few words this morning at the beginning of this session, and I think it's partly because 4 of the 9 people you're about to hear from are my students, or have been my students. Or what I should say, I guess the right way around, is that I've had the privilege of being their teacher, and I think you'll see what I mean. A few years ago at this conference, there would have been no session called Young Professionals Perspective, primarily because there were no young people at the conference. But I suppose me, like I was the youngest, I was maybe 45. And there's nothing the matter, of course, with being old, I'm finding, but it is it's a terminal condition. It comes to an end at some point. So it's very good to have some younger people around. Now we've got a group in the ACO which call themselves the Next Generation. Except, in fact, I don't think of them now as the next generation. I think of them as the now generation. The perspectives that they're going to give us, I think, are just professional perspectives. They just happen to be people who are younger. And so I'm going to do what I've been saying that people like me should be doing. I'm going to get out of the way and let them do it. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and I'm the chair of the ACO Next Gen, and so I was asked to put together this panel. And I decided to do it a little bit differently than all the other panels because we like to be different. So what I put together is hopefully a showcase to show the work of not only young professionals but young volunteers. So trying to get a variety of perspectives of people who are working in heritage, who are studying heritage as a student, as a master's student, people who are volunteering in heritage in different ways. So I hope that gives you a variety of perspectives of how young professionals are involved in heritage. What I did is I asked each of these people, young professionals, volunteers, whatever you want to call them, to talk about something that they're working on that they're passionate about. So they're not going to address, their life as a young professional. They're going to actually address the work that they're doing. And I think that you're going to find some of it really interesting because I do. That's why I've asked them to speak. And I've asked each person to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, so it's going to be really fast. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So I have about 3 questions to put to the panel, and they'll sit up here in terms of their perspectives. And then there'll be time for everyone to ask questions about either the whole panel or the specific projects that people are working on. So just to introduce you quickly to the entourage of this panel, we have obviously Dr. Robert Shipley, who just spoke, who is my boss, and I would consider him also my mentor at the Heritage Resources Center. We have Lindsay Benjamin, who is going to talk about her work at the Heritage Resources Center. And I'm sad to say, and happy at the same time, that she's leaving the Heritage Resources Center this week, actually, to start a new job at the Region of Waterloo. We have Vanessa Hicks, who has studied at the University of Waterloo and is now a planner at the town of Aurora. We have Kyle Aganu, who is a junior cultural heritage specialist, that's quite a mouthful, at Golder Associates, and he'll be talking about some of his work as well. We have Sherry Rutherford, who is a master's candidate at the University of Carleton. Have you finished, Sherry, or you're so close? So close. And I met Sherry, she's one of the organizers of the Carleton Heritage Symposium. We have David Wenser, who is going to be talking about his experience as a heritage volunteer, but he also works as the archivist at Sick Kids, so a professional and a volunteer capacity that he's going to be showing us. We have Amy Calder, who is also studying at the University of Waterloo, but she's going to be talking to us today about her perspective as a volunteer on an arts organization that's looking for some heritage kind of partnership to move forward, so a slightly different perspective. And then Shannon Clayton will be finishing us up at the end, and she works at ERA. Am I right? Okay. I've lost you in the thing. And she is a co-executive with me on the ACO Next Gen. So she's going to be wrapping it up at the end, telling you about what the ACO Next Gen does and what specifically her role has been in that. So without further ado, I will get started with Lindsay. I need my caffeine, sorry.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Are we ready? Good morning. Can you see me, actually? This is a big podium. So today, as Kayla mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about a project that I worked on at the Heritage Resources Centre for the last year, which was a heritage bridge inventory. So I'll give you a bit of a background. The inventory was titled Arch, Truss and Beam, the Grand River Watershed Heritage Bridge Inventory. And we worked on this project over the last year. So it began last March and wrapped up in April of this year. And the purpose of the inventory was to comprehensively look at heritage bridges in the Grand River watershed, which is something that hadn't been done before at such a large scale. And this map just kind of puts the watershed in context. It's quite a large area. It's about 680 square kilometers. So there's a lot of rivers in that area. The need for the inventory was spearheaded by the Grand River Conservation Authority, as they were identifying quite a bit of heritage bridge loss in the area. And this was stemming from urbanization, increased traffic volume and loads, and the growing size of farm machinery in the area on some quite small rural bridges. And this was leading to a loss of tourism potential as well as aesthetics in the area. So a lot of bridges were being replaced with more utilitarian bridges that aren't quite as aesthetically pleasing. And there's a really rich history and culture in the watershed, so this is quite significant to prevent from being a widespread issue. So for the sake of time, as we have 5 minutes, I'll just quickly run through some of the results of the inventory. We looked at 678 bridges in total. That's what we inventoried. From there, we narrowed it down to 350 plus site visits throughout the watershed, and then ultimately resulted in 167 heritage bridges identified. We also recorded 37 demolished heritage bridges that likely would have been heritage bridges if they were still existing today. 13 designated bridges, and it also became important to record threatened bridges in an effort to try to proactively save them, keep an eye on these bridges as they're threatened in the future. To give you a taste for what we identified, there's some icons in the watershed, some bridges that you might be familiar with. So the first one on the top left there, that's the Caledonia Bridge. It's a 9-span concrete bowstring arch bridge that was built in 1927. And it's the longest concrete bowstring arch bridge in Canada. Unfortunately, it's also threatened with demolition in the coming years. The next is the West Montrose Kissing Bridge. It was built in 1881, and it's the last original 19th century covered bridge in Ontario. It's also the second oldest bridge in the region of Waterloo. And lastly, there's the David Street Bridge. And this is an evolving structure. It was built in 1867, the pier was. It's the original stone pier, but the deck and the superstructure has evolved through time. And then, perhaps even more interestingly, are some of the rarities in the watershed. So these are bridges on smaller roads that aren't quite as well known, but are very significant to the cultural identity of the watershed. So on the top left is the Glen Morris Bridge. This one was built circa 1854. It's one of the oldest in the watershed. And there were very few masonry bridges we found. And it was also quite rare for the inclusion of a culvert, and this is an abandoned railway bridge. Next to that is the Roos Island Bridge. It was constructed in 1896, and it's a cantilever through truss, quite small for that type of bridge. It's the only one in the watershed, and it's also pin-connected and cast iron, which are pretty rare features to still find today. And it's located in Victoria Park in Kitchener. And lastly, there's the old Fourth Line Bridge. It was built in 1908, and it's located on a farmer's property. It's abandoned now, but it's the oldest concrete arch bridge in the watershed. And the names of significant people to that structure are still engraved in the sides of the bridge. So in terms of benefits, the approach we used was adopted from the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority in their award-winning inventory from 2002, which was called Crossing the Humber. So we used their model because it worked very well, and we adapted it to suit the context of the Grand River watershed, which, as I mentioned, is very large and contains many hundreds more bridges than the Humber watershed. To determine the significance, we relied on criteria that was prescribed by provincial legislation under the Ontario Heritage Act, which is Ontario Regulation 906. This criteria is widely used and recognized, and it also allowed for a consistent form of evaluation for each bridge across the watershed to determine cultural heritage value, and it could also ultimately set up a bridge for heritage designation. And we're hoping one of the goals of this inventory was that the approach could be further adapted and adopted by other watershed municipalities or conservation authorities at either a provincial or a national level, as it's something that can be easily adapted. And lastly, the outcomes. We're hoping that this is a planning tool that decision makers can consult proactively when work associated with a bridge is being contemplated. And we've found that it's been useful already. We just presented to the Grand River Conservation Authority Board, and at that presentation, it was used for some proposals on bridges, and luckily those structures were in the inventory. So that sets some baseline historic information and some resources that can be consulted. So it can be used by a wide range of people: planners, engineers, architects, property owners, developers, the tourism industry, educators, and just interested people in the general public. It's also a helpful tool for cultural planning and mapping, community education, and heritage tourism. And we're hoping that the inventory will also continue to grow. Due to the huge scope of the watershed, it was difficult to capture every single bridge, but through time and even through releasing this publication, more and more bridges are coming to light, so hopefully it will continue to evolve and grow through time, with more focus maybe on railway bridges and bridges on private property as well. So that summarizes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Hello. Good morning. Everybody's wide awake at 8 a.m. Okay, so within about 10 slides, I'm going to try to talk to you about what my master's thesis was about. And can everyone hear me? Okay? Oh, good. Okay. So, key findings: social, cultural, and economic stability in Hamilton's business improvement areas. And so why Hamilton? I get this question a lot. I'm really in love with Hamilton. I think it's a city with a lot of great potential, and it's a place where I was born. So it's a really interesting case of me being born somewhere and watching a city really grow and evolve over time. And I became really interested in that from a planning perspective. So I decided to do a case study on Hamilton's business improvement areas, and this is a little bit about what I found. So I tried to connect business improvement areas with heritage resources, and how I did that was I understood that the areas in some parts of town, commonly called central business districts, are kind of the hearts of the city, and they usually have quite a wealth of built heritage resources, and I'm talking about those parts of town where they have old buildings and boutiques and things of that nature. And they're commonly in need of improvement. So a business improvement area is a type of regeneration program for these areas. And because they have so many built heritage resources, I thought it was a good area for study. So what is a business improvement area? It's found in the Municipal Act under Section 5. And like I said, it's essentially a type of urban regeneration program. And they're found all over the world now. The first was actually in Toronto, Bloor West Village in the 1970s, I believe. And they're known in some parts of the world as business improvement districts, that's in the States, or city improvement districts in South America. But here we know them as business improvement areas. And essentially what it is a type of regeneration program to help beautify the area, make it pedestrian friendly, and turn it into a very successful shopping area most often. And it helps to do things like the banners that you see here, hanging baskets, so it's really helping to enhance the pedestrian environment. And how it works is it's a who benefits, who pays type of improvement. So those who are located within the boundaries are taxed for those kinds of improvements. They set up a board that makes decisions on where the money should go, things of that nature. Not all business improvement areas are the same, so there's some flexibility there, but that's generally how it works. And I just have a list here at the bottom of what they usually do. So urban design, maintenance, crime prevention, marketing, things of that nature, but it's different depending on what the BIA needs. So in my thesis in Hamilton, there are 14 business improvement areas, but I couldn't do every single one of them because then I would probably die. There's just a lot of them. So I chose 3. One is, who here is a little bit familiar with Hamilton? Just so I know, hands up. Okay, great. Okay, so I chose Barton Village, which is a business improvement area that's about 2 kilometers long. And I chose 2 more, which was downtown Hamilton and International Village. And they're just exactly adjacent to each other, so that lower red block is actually the downtown BIA and International Village. But to conserve time, I'm just going to talk about the two that were the most different, which is going to be Barton Village and International Village. So here are my key findings from my study. And in order to collect data from my study, I did a building condition and use survey, where I took a clipboard and I went to every single building on the streetscape on the main street and took a score from 1 to 5 for criteria. One of them was heritage integrity maintained. Then I would list the building elements like windows and doors and give them a score so that I could have a score for exactly, give a mean number for the street for how well it was kept, things of that nature. The second was a business mail-in survey. So I went into every single business that I could and gave them a survey so that they could fill it out. I asked them questions like, do you think the heritage resources in this community is important to you? Things of that nature. And then I did a few interviews with key informants. So what did I find? Well, for International Village, I found that most of the buildings on the streetscape level, about 96 of them were businesses, and that it had a mean score of about 59.8%, which was satisfactory for most buildings. Very little vacancy in the study, and I'll talk about how that compared to the other business improvement area in a second. And their vacancy rates are actually declining pretty well. In terms of social stability, 10% of buildings had graffiti or vandalism. Drop-off surveys, 7 participants felt safe, half of them felt unsafe, and so it was kind of on the fence with that one. People equally felt safe or unsafe, that their businesses were free from vandalism, robberies, that sort of thing. 65 out of the 83 buildings I found were historic. Thank you. And a score of 51% for old complementing new elements. So that's like the heritage integrity aspect of it. And here's some pictures. This is International Village. And I'll just go quickly through Barton Village. So what I found mostly was only 2/3 were businesses, actually, and the remainder of them were residences that were actually maybe historically storefronts, but because of the need for low-rent housing, they were actually transformed, and sometimes not so sympathetically to the heritage resources, into an additional apartment building on the front of the streetscape. Very high vacancy rates, probably the biggest problem. A lot of them were boarded up, and I'll show you pictures of that in a second so you can quickly see. A lot of graffiti, and a lot of the residents felt very unsafe. So I was able to identify or give some sort of number to what the problems were and identify them and have some hard evidence of what that was and what the building conditions were like. So I'll just show you some pictures. So here's, for example, a heritage building that may not have been so sympathetically turned into a business, backlit signage, that sort of thing. This is a great example that's in the BIA. It's an old school that's being turned into a community housing project, and this is really the kind of thing that I think is really enhancing the area. And of course, they're using an old building, which is great, and I think it's really going to be great in the future to see. So this is the kind of thing, unfortunately, that the streetscape is absolutely full of. You have these really beautiful buildings that have a lot of potential, but people in the community were often saying that they didn't think that the heritage resources were important to them, but that's because we weren't doing it right. And I think they may have a point here, and it's easy to see with things like this. And when the vacancy comes in and when the buildings are being boarded up, the whole streetscape is in this kind of this cycle that provides bad examples, I guess. And unfortunately, the streetscape, this is kind of the norm. So here's another example right beside a church where it could have a great opportunity to bring something to the community, but this is just another example. Okay, so that's my presentation. I think we're going to leave the questions for the end, but I think that's about it.
Good morning. Hi. So last summer I had the good fortune of getting a job with Loyalist Township to update the Village of Bath Heritage Conservation District Plan. So this was a huge undertaking, and it was funded by the Creative Communities Prosperity Fund. So I got a desk in the township offices and sort of slugged away working on this plan from May until September. And I'm pleased to inform you that on April 22nd it was adopted by bylaw at council, so the plan has been updated. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Bath is a community that's located on the north shore of Lake Ontario. It's about halfway between Picton and Kingston, and it's right on Highway 33 or Loyalist Parkway. It's also a very old community. It was first established in 1784 by Loyalists who left the 13 colonies. But the thing that was really significant about these Loyalists is that they were mostly what we would say today is middle class. Most of them owned their own land, but they weren't significant enough landowners to be compensated with thousands of acre grants like some of the settlers who went to Cornwall or Newark areas. So because of this, in 1818, they established the Bath Bill, which was essentially a petition to settle the community of Bath. And that's when they first established the settlement plan for the community. And then in 1856, they achieved village status, and they maintained their status really until the 1860s. And this is something that I found that was very significant, is that they were a part of a lot of very early transportation routes. However, they were not on the Grand Trunk Rail line, and that's really when the community started to change. After Napanee was appointed the county seat in 1866, things started to really slow down in Bath, and that's why there's a lot of really amazing vernacular wooden architecture that still is in the village. So one of the major things that I identified is that its integrity is really pre-Confederation, which is something that's sort of unique in Ontario. So this is a map that shows the designated properties in the village of Bath. If some of you were on the bus tour last year for the Kingston Conference, you may remember Fairfield Goodsite House and also Ham House, which are two sort of landmark buildings in Bath. They're at the east end of the village, and the district, so there's a detail of it. It's 9 properties at the extreme west end of the village. So this is just a sampling of some of the buildings that I was researching. So you see the Masonic Lodge. It's a double veranda with a double-story veranda, and that's something that really was throughout the village. However, this is the only one that's still standing. You have the Dr. Roderick Kennedy House, which was built in 1855 in sort of a Regency style, He was the first person of Aboriginal descent to receive a medical degree from a European institution, so there's a lot of significance there. The Reeves Brother House is one that's particularly interesting in trying to figure out how it has evolved and what has changed. It's got some peculiar elements. And the Bath Town Hall, which was built in 1861. And really the only reason it was built was to make sure that the neighboring community was not the district seat. So there's been a lot of research that's been done on Bath. Its significance really has been understood and acknowledged. But the Red Book, right there on the screen, that's sort of the seminal publication. What I found in this community is that the most important books were just referred to by their color. So everyone knew what the Red Book was, and it really had a lot of significance in acknowledging some of the important heritage buildings within the village. So people were quite proud to say that, oh, my house is in the Red Book. However, that didn't always translate into a designated property. One thing that was sort of interesting is that's included the Heritage District's work, 2009 study, and that sort of started to get some momentum going in sort of updating the HCD plan. And there's a list of other sources on the village. So I got to do a lot of really interesting research. This is something that I found digging through archives and references and footnotes, lots of footnotes. But this is an 1816-1817 plane projection of the North Channel. And this was completed by Captain William Fitzwilliam Owen. And he was under the command of Henry Bayfield. So what they did was in the winter, they went out and they measured the depth of the North Channel. So at the top, it says Ernest Town, which was the original name of Bath before 1818. And then you can see Amherst Island on the bottom. So this also shows some of the development of the community of Bath at this early stage. Right beneath Ernest Town, you can see a dot, and that's for St. John's Church, which was built in 1793. So I looked at a variety of other mapping, and I really found that by about the 1859 Walling map, things had sort of gotten to their full extent. Bath really didn't grow any more than this. No change. There were a couple of fires that did have some impact. This was more on the main street, and there are some gaps that I know the community is very eager to work on and grow, and new grocery stores coming to the community that people are excited about. But there was a lot of integrity that was still in the Heritage Conservation District. Nothing really changed by the 1920s, and really not much today either. So it just evolves, and that's it today. But I learned a lot of things. But I would like to acknowledge Denise and Andrea up in the balcony. Give a wave. They are on my committee. They were on the Heritage Committee, and they were an awesome resource. So I can't emphasize enough how awesome they were to work with and how supportive they were of the things I wanted to research and do. But those were some of the things I learned. But responding to the community context is something that's really important. There's sort of a lot of typical red flags that were shown. Insurance was a big issue that came up, maintenance and property standards. And I think these are things that a lot of communities have to deal with. But finding resources on where to provide information to residents is something that I struggled with. And that's something that I think that we could do better as a heritage community to support each other. But that's it for me.
We're going to take questions at the end once everyone's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's me, sorry.
Okay, so hi. I'm here today to talk to you as one of the organizers of this year's Carleton University Heritage Conservation Symposium. Unfortunately, my co-organizer, Rebecca, couldn't actually be here today, but it was together that we both looked back and reflected on our experiences with the event in preparation for this panel. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of what our symposium is all about, some of our goals and our successes for this year, and various insights with which we walked away afterwards. So 2013 marks the symposium's 8th year, and its third being run entirely by graduate students from Carleton's Department of Canadian Studies Heritage Conservation stream. Beyond being a great platform for new students and emerging professionals to start getting involved in the conference circuit, it's a popular event that has consistently brought together members of the heritage conservation community, both academics, advocates, and practitioners alike, each and every spring for a meeting of the minds. As Rebecca and I set out to plan this year's symposium, we knew we had several goals that we wanted to meet, and a number of challenges we'd have to overcome in order to do so. Above all, our personal experiences in an interdisciplinary classroom, hosting students from a breadth of interests and backgrounds, had a huge impact on us and really shaped our desire to reach out to the heritage conservation community in its widest definition. As we saw over and over again during our time at Carleton, heritage is about so much more than just architecture these days, though it's still definitely very important. Rebecca, for instance, studies the connections between social media and heritage, and I'm personally studying culinary heritage. So with this in mind, we challenged ourselves to make the 2013 symposium as interdisciplinary and as inclusive as possible. Ultimately, we decided on the theme of heritage and technology, hoping that it would attract a diverse group of speakers and attendees. Our call for papers asked to hear about experiences working with technology in all its many forms, encouraging submissions on topics ranging from industrial heritage sites to the use of technology in conservation practice. The result was a wonderfully broad and very varied array of paper submissions and a great attendance turnout. We also had a lot of success with what was actually a last-minute addition to the symposium day, live tweeting. We had maintained a Twitter account throughout the preceding months primarily as a promotional tool, but a few days before the event, we made up a hashtag and added it to the back of our programs. So you can see some of the results up on the screen from the screenshot. We were really pleasantly surprised to see that when the symposium arrived, phones were out and thumbs were busy tweeting away. Though unexpected, it was really great to see how the use of Twitter encouraged an extra layer of engagement, especially amongst the new generation set. Technology allowed attendees to participate actively during presentations and connect with other people in the room that they may not have met otherwise. So, to be entirely honest, when all was said and done, Rebecca and I were pretty happy to leave the hectic months of planning and the stresses of the event day behind us, as I'm sure any organizers of this event in the room can definitely relate to. But despite that, organizing the symposium was an undeniably rewarding experience, and amongst all the craziness, we actually learned a lot, both about putting on conferences and about our personal views of emerging issues in heritage more broadly. First of all, without rehashing everything I've already said, based on the positivity and enthusiasm with which our efforts were received, Rebecca and I both really hope to see our goal of interdisciplinarity and inclusivity carried forward into next year's symposium. And we would recommend it as a worthwhile endeavor to anyone thinking of organizing a similar event. The rich diversity of presentations and attendees was great to see in a conference setting, which at its heart is meant to bring together people to share knowledge and ideas in a collaborative space. We also think it's important to note that events like the Carleton Symposium that emphasize student participation provide a really valuable opportunity for the future of heritage field to step outside the ivory tower and connect with a wider network of actors. Then, of course, having helped organize the symposium focusing on heritage and technology, I can't not mention how integral a tool technology proved to be for us. I talked a little bit about this great success with live tweeting, but technologies as simple as email and really popular ones like Facebook were also crucial in promotional work, keeping in touch with presenters and helping us to recruit volunteers. Part of the difficulty in chasing after interdisciplinarity and making sure your call for papers gets everywhere it needs to go is just the fact that it's hard to actually make those connections, and technology helps with that. Similarly, if a conference is meant to be focused on students, how do you get them to come out and volunteer or submit papers or even attend? And again, using technology, especially popular technologies, is really helpful in making those connections. So in a small way, I guess this kind of reflects a broader trend that we discussed in depth at our symposium, and that's namely that technology's growing role in the heritage field is really important, and it's ever increasing. Last, but definitely not least, as the organizers of an annual event going into its 8th year of being, Rebecca and I quickly learned that finding a balance between appreciating and meeting the often heavy expectations of the past, while also keeping an eye to the future, is not always easy. We not only felt we had to live up to the successes of previous organizers, but also the legacy of the late Herb Stovall, an influential and deeply respected member of the heritage community, without whom the Carleton Heritage Symposium probably wouldn't exist. At the same time, we also knew that we needed to build on the symposium's past, making it bigger and better than ever. Luckily, this is a goal that over time has become the symposium's enduring motto, "What's next?" A philosophy which pushes for constant improvement and evolution, and gave us the freedom we felt we needed to make the symposium our own. In this, I think there's a really good lesson, not just for organizers of similar events, but also for the next generation of heritage professionals. Obviously, the field of heritage conservation has a long legacy that we all want to live up to and that we need to respect as we enter the field. But we also have an opportunity to build on that legacy, adding our own voices and actions to it, and it's very important that we do so. Thanks.
Hello. Is anyone going to be able to hear me if I'm talking this far from the mic? All right. So I'm going to be talking a little bit differently today. My experience getting involved with heritage has been through volunteer groups and volunteer organizations. I have a history degree, but I haven't pursued anything involving planning or heritage at an academic level. My involvement started with my local historical society, which is the West Toronto Junction Historical Society. If you don't know, the Junction is a neighborhood within the west end of Toronto. Incorporated as a village in 1884, later became a town, and in 1908 it actually became a city, and prior to the big megacity amalgamation a few years ago, it was the only other city that Toronto had sort of swallowed up in its big sort of expansion project. And the first project that I got involved with was a centennial in 2008 for the Junction having become a city, and it lasted all of 1 year because in 2009, we got to celebrate the centennial of the Junction becoming part of Toronto, and we got to do a second centennial again. And the first project that I got involved in meant sending people into the local high schools to present local history stories about buildings and people and events, and to share these stories with the students and to ask those students to give it back to us for the centennial in the form of art and songs and comic books and whatever creative means that they wanted. And I was new to the Historical Society, so I didn't really know how to do research. I didn't know any of these stories already. And it would have made much more sense, in hindsight, for the Historical Society to have just sent all the experts and all the veterans out there to tell these stories. So they knew these stories in their sleep, and they could go out there and talk about all the important people and the events and the buildings that made the Junction what it is. And for whatever reason, I was one of the people that was brought into it. And I only had a few months really at the time I was asked to be involved with this to learn a few stories. And they gave me a lot of source material and it was good, but it wasn't enough for me to feel like I really knew the stories. So I started going to libraries and archives and looking for extra information and looking at old newspapers, learning how to do searches on properties and tax assessment rolls and fire insurance maps. And I started finding a few things that the Society didn't even have already. And I started adding to the story that they thought was already known and out there. And unwittingly, within a few months, I had become the local expert on the Heinzman Piano Factory. I had become the expert on the Carleton Racetrack, which was a racetrack that's certainly no longer in the Junction, but is where the first 4 runnings of the Queen's Plate were from 1860 to 1863. And just several other properties in the area that people hadn't realized had as much significance as we now know that they do. So I had acquired all this new knowledge, I had acquired all these new skills, and most importantly, I think, I had acquired a new enthusiasm that I didn't realize I had for this kind of work. And as a result of one of the Historical Society meetings, some people cornered me and said, how would you like to join the Etobicoke York Community Preservation Panel? And I didn't know what that was, and I said, sure. And they said, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We'll explain to you what the panel does and what the processes are. It turns out what it does is it makes recommendations to preservation staff at the City of Toronto for heritage matters relating to the west end of Toronto. In Toronto, there's so many properties that we split things up into different quadrants, much as if the megacity amalgamation had not happened, in fact. So I look after, or I'm one of several people who looks after Etobicoke and York in the West End. So yeah, they helped me with that, and what they specifically said is we wanted someone from the Junction for a long time, so we're glad to have you, and our group wants some new blood. We're tired of having the same people here all the time. Some of us are getting fatigued with it. We want new people. We want new blood. And from this, things just started to snowball. I learned about heritage designation. I started researching buildings and filing designations or nominations for designations. I started doing walking tours. Started joining new committees, getting involved with advocacy, writing about the things I had researched, which led to writing for websites and blogs, and I now get paid to do a little bit of that. Lindsay mentioned the Humber River Bridge inventory, and I was involved in trying to find pictures and newspaper references for some of that. And I think there's sort of two main things that I sort of want people to take away from my experience. The first is I think it's important for volunteers to feel important and necessary. When I'd first started with the Historical Society, I was just doing scanning photos and menial tasks, and it wasn't very engaging. But as much as I like all the volunteer activities where there's free food and free drinks, and that's Volunteer Appreciation Day, what really gets me is the fact that what I'm doing is important. With my day job, if I wasn't doing my day job, there'd be somebody else doing my day job. But with a lot of the volunteering work that I do, if I'm not doing that work, there's no one else who's going to do it. So I would say to groups, help your new volunteers, no matter what their age, to become experts in something and become knowledgeable in something, because they're really going to benefit from that experience. And if you're a young person looking to get involved and your group's not giving you that opportunity, make that opportunity for yourself. Just start learning about something and researching about something and trying to learn as much as you can about anything that you think interests you, even if you think other people know about it already. And like I say, everyone says our group needs new blood. They don't just want your membership money or you sitting in their seats for their meetings. They want your blood in the nicest possible interpretation of that sentence. The second thing is that ordinary people get involved with heritage because they want to learn. And yes, I've learned a lot about history, but I've also learned a lot about new tools and sources and skills. I've learned from the veterans. I like to think some of them have learned a little bit from me too, just from the little things that I found. I've learned so much from a lot of wonderful people who have been at this game much, much longer than I have. And I've learned that heritage people never think that they know it all, and that there's always more to learn, and that they're willing to learn from anyone, no matter what their age might be. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm coming at heritage from a similar perspective, from the volunteer sphere, I guess. So yeah, I'm Amy Calder, and I've been involved in an arts organization based in the city of Guelph for the past 2 to 3 years. So basically how I got into this is that I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Guelph in art. So I studied photography, and that was sort of my first connection to heritage, I guess, is just through photographing and wandering around cities. And then I came across this group called The Platform, who was looking to mobilize around creating a cultural center for the city of Guelph. So The Platform, an initiative for a creative space, formed in 2009 as a steering committee and incorporated shortly after. So they've been working for a number of years on this issue in Guelph, trying to address a real lack of space for the arts community, which is quite vital to the city, but also quite active just in really disparate spaces around the city and not so accessible spaces, and some poorly maintained as well. So yeah, the real impetus is the artistic community in the city, and our vision seeks to find a space that is affordable, accessible, can support a diversity of uses as well as communities, encourages collaboration between arts groups and different groups in the city, is sustainable, and supports community. So the premise of my talk today is really to talk about my experience with the board for the past 2 going on 3 years, and some of the different spaces we've come up against and some of the different challenges and potential solutions. So as I said, Guelph has a very active arts community. We have a number of festivals that occur every summer. You probably know of Hillside. There are dance festivals, theater festivals, lots of independent artists, as well as smaller guilds and craft groups that are actually, they're not small. They've got large memberships, but they're operating out of sort of less opportune spaces. So there are, from the heritage side, there are over 2,000 buildings listed on the City of Guelph Heritage Inventory. They're working on their first Heritage Conservation District, so things are definitely quite strong in terms of heritage in Guelph. However, there's a lack of sort of the ideal art space, the large industrial building, or just large spaces in general in the downtown and accessible buildings. So for us, there's really two veins as we've been growing as an organization. We're constantly looking at properties, and I'll talk about a few of them on the next slide, but we're also continually growing our organization through development and capacity building with the community. So we have looked at a lot of buildings. This is not even all of them in my time on the board, and they've all kind of, they've had various fates. So we've looked at a number of industrial spaces, and notably the cotton mill was really an ideal space that the group mobilized around. It was in the downtown area, but has since been demolished and is now a parking lot. Very sad story there. We've looked at institutional spaces that are owned by the city. We've looked at commercial spaces, a church where we were going to collaborate with the church group to occupy part of the building and allow them to sustain their congregation. They've since sold to another church, so that's appropriate as well. And we've also looked at different office spaces in the city, and as you can see from the map, we're generally fairly concentrated around the downtown. That's part of our vision as well, is to maintain that tight community of arts in the downtown core. But we've also branched up towards the hospital in the north end and over into the St. Patrick's Ward, and even as far as the Guelph Correctional Centre, which is at the moment provincially owned and designated and is part of a future development, but not for a number of years. So we've come up with a lot of the same challenges as most people do. Buildings that are contaminated, for instance, the Camtour property, which is right in the middle of a neighborhood. Beautiful space, high ceilings, lots of glass, ideal for artist studios and kind of a 401 Richmond sort of feel to it, but something that's difficult for a nonprofit to take on. So it's really going to take some collaboration to approach those kinds of buildings. We've had issues with buildings that have major structural integrity problems, from bowing walls and property owners who, insist they can do minor adjustments to make it workable. But when you're coming from the side of being an incorporated nonprofit, you have to obviously maintain certain standards for your buildings. And we also encourage, or we have memberships that deal with sort of sensitive populations like children and that kind of thing. So we have to really be careful. We're not so much just a group of artists looking for rough studio space. We've kind of got a broader vision. Accessibility is a really key thing for the city. In terms of performance, which is another vein of art that we represent, we're really lacking about a 200-seat performance venue that's accessible. We have a lot of small bars and things like that offer great venues for smaller performances, and then we have the River Run Center, which of course is a wonderful facility, but is quite large and it's prohibitive in terms of cost for smaller performances. So then this other vein that we're always having challenges with is just organizational challenges in terms of funding. We're a nonprofit. It's difficult to maintain consistent funding, but also with fundraising. When we don't have a building at the moment, and we mobilize around buildings all the time, but it's difficult to fundraise for a non-specific building. But also we've found that the building stock that is available in Guelph, as I said, is not usually sort of what we'd like, which would be between 20 to 30,000 square feet, tends to be under 10,000 square feet. So we found that our vision has really had to evolve with the built cultural heritage resources that are around, and we're more so thinking towards creative hubs and maybe having to break up the different elements of our vision, but maintain a consistent membership throughout the buildings. So in terms of solutions, we've really had to consistently encourage ourselves to be realistic and to focus on our vision as well, because actually in 2011, between 2010 and 2011, we had a mentorship with Artscape from the City of Toronto. So a big thing that they encouraged us to do is, focus on the vision. Yes, it's a big space that we're looking for, but and it will take a number of years, but at the same time, they felt that if we broke off into other spaces and started up buildings, then we might distract from that larger goal. So another thing is supportive resources, and what I'm referring to there is different grants that are available. So we are supported by the City of Guelph with a minor operational grant every year. We've also been trusteed by the Guelph Arts Council for a number of years too, so we can offer charitable receipts for donations. But also we look towards grants like the Trillium Grant for an actual programmer to work in our future building. A number of other grant opportunities are there as well. So our biggest boon, I guess, is that we've been really working on fostering relationships over the years. So as I said, with the City of Guelph, we're also on the Chamber of Commerce, so we try to maintain that connection with the business community. But also we have a number of members that have expressed interest in space that are quite functional on their own. They're dance companies, they are performance, theater groups, and they can bring some capital to a space as well. So we've looked at the opportunity of them leasing a space and us providing basically filling in the time when they don't need their space, so we can encourage some collaboration between other groups and make sure spaces are fully tenanted. But also, we supported a Trillium Grant application with the Guelph Arts Council, and we now have a dedicated creative space coordinator who is managed by the Guelph Arts Council. So this position has been created to address this problem in Guelph and give some permanent voice to the issues and help us move forward. And on that note as well, just last week actually, a few of our board members joined the Guelph Arts Council board as well, so we're working towards a merger with the Arts Council, because this issue has been existing in Guelph for a number of years, and they're really the best umbrella organization to work on it. We're the space faction of that, they're the support for the artists, so we're trying to come together and leverage our assets. So just a quick note, there are a couple of opportunities that have come up and things that have mobilized in the years that we've been working. So there's Black's Boarding House on Dublin Street in the previous Civic Museum in Guelph. And this space, we actually lobbied council for the purchase of the space from the city. It's privately owned, and unfortunately the space really became slanted towards visual arts, which is good. There's definitely a lot of need there too. However, our vision incorporates a lot of different mediums. But it's a 3-story building and basement space, all usable. There's gallery, there are studios, and a really recent space that provides a precedent for our group is Crafts for You on Edinburgh Road. So it's just a small building. It's going to be a studio, gallery, and sales venue, but it's really strongly supported by the city. They have given the group $12,000 towards renovation costs, which are $24,000 in total, and 14 months rent exemption. So this is definitely a great precedent for us, and we're looking forward to using that as some motivation, let's say, when we're in discussions with the city and development. So these are my acknowledgements, all the supporters of our group. We've definitely had a lot of support over the years, and we've collaborated on programming events and things to maintain the vision in the city, and I hope that we're successful in the future. So thank you very much.
Oh no. What did you do?
Just press next.
What?
What did I do?
I don't know. Oh no, you lost all your pictures. There we go. Okay.
I pressed the wrong thing. Okay, sorry, I'm a Mac user. Yeah. Okay, so I'm Shannon, and many of you may be members of the ACO, but if you don't know the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, it's a not-for-profit organization that works to preserve buildings and structures of architectural merit and places of natural beauty or interest. I've been involved with the ACO since 2010 when I was a summer student at the provincial office in Toronto. So this is a picture from a previous Ontario Heritage Conference. I'm not sure which one. And as you can see, there's a very clear demographic here. And for many years, the ACO's membership has been generally dominated by middle-aged to elderly individuals with very little racial diversity. Like Robert Shipley was saying, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but
In the past few years, specifically, the ACO has been actively trying to involve younger people in the organization itself. I was working at the provincial office in 2010 when this was becoming a really important issue, and I was specifically involved with trying to engage younger members through social media and through rebranding of all of our promotional materials. Actually, I should say first. Initially, Kayla and Clark. Clark was the president of the ACO Clarington branch at the time, and he's also in his 20s, which is a rarity on the board. Kayla and Clark were enlisted to conduct online questionnaires and focus groups to try to come up with ideas of how to engage young people in the ACO. So out of this, we created a Students and Young Professionals group in 2011, which we call ACO Next Gen. Basically, the goal is to provide educational and networking opportunities for students and young professionals with an interest in heritage. So I'm just going to go through all of the successful events that we've had so far. This was a general meet and greet, which was our first event. We had a lecture from past President Lloyd Alter about the sustainable aspects of heritage conservation entitled Heritage is Green. Some of us participated in a time raiser, which is essentially a silent auction where you volunteer hours, which is essentially your currency for art, to buy art. It's an art. We had a tour of Camp 30 POW camp in Bowmanville, which was an amazing tour, and we had a great turnout. It was actually, I think, the last time people were able to access the site before they closed it off. We had a tour of Maple Leaf Gardens given by ERA architect Scott Weir, and we had a great turnout of that as well. And that was actually the day after the ACO dinner, so we were able to get a lot of people just by advertising about it at the dinner. We've also established a new award at the ACO Awards called the Next Gen Award, and it was presented to Jamie Bradburn this year, who is a wonderful writer for several blogs, particularly in Toronto. So he actually went on the Camp 30 tour as well, and he wrote a really lovely article about that, and it brought a lot of interest to our group. And in February, we introduced a very successful job shadowing program, which allowed students and young professionals an opportunity to work alongside heritage professionals for the day. But I'm more specifically going to talk about an event we had last September, which was a heritage design shred. I came up with this idea in February of 2012 because I was the only full-time student in our main group at the time, and I really wanted to expand our range to students in particular. And being from architecture school, I thought it would be cool to have a design shred with a heritage site in mind. So as a small group, we immediately agreed on 197 to 205 Yonge Street in downtown Toronto because we thought the site had a lot of potential and was very easily accessible. If you've ever been to the Eaton Centre in Toronto, you've probably seen it right across the street. There are two Edwardian bank buildings separated by an open lot, which have been underused or vacant for many, many years. Actually, I'm a little bit early. Because there's a condo project going on at 197 Yonge right now, I was able to meet with the Heritage Architects, ERA Architects, where I now work, but at that time I didn't work there, who helped me brainstorm ideas and provided us with invaluable resources such as a 3D model and many drawings and just general history and information about the site. And we were able to give that to the shred participants to use while they were working on their proposal. We also had, going ahead of myself. Thankfully, the Ontario Heritage Trust allowed us to use their event space in the Ontario Heritage Trust headquarters building, and which was very nearby to the project site. So you can kind of see the space in these pictures. It's a really gorgeous double height space, and it was a perfect place for our event. And we were able to get about 25 participants, which were mostly students from Ryerson Architecture and Waterloo Planning, and they worked in groups of 5 or 6. Amy and Vanessa, who just gave presentations today, were actually attendants at the shred. We also had 4 distinguished judges, which were Masha Edkind from Ryerson, Robert Shipley from Waterloo, who's here with us today, and we love him, John Ward from ICOMOS, and Alan Killen from Intbau. And they were really wonderful and surprisingly very involved with the students. The 3 men, this is a really awesome shot of them on the site. They were checking out the site and just talking to the students all day and providing advice, and it was really amazing. This team in the right corner, they ordered sushi and had that at their table, which I thought was really wonderful. And honestly, the result was just amazing, just seeing the groups work well together and what they came up with. I just kept being surprised that they were really working and into it. And I think it was really great seeing architecture students and planning students working together, because I think that's something that we're lacking in school, is that collaboration across fields. And overall, the charrette really demonstrated the benefits of collaboration and was a wonderful way to expand your views and gain valuable networking experiences. You know, they met people and had presentations from people from ICOMOS and Intbau and learned a lot, I'm sure. And I think it's, particularly in heritage, it's important to have that cross-disciplinary experience, because there's so many things involved in heritage. And I think for any young person who wants to be involved in heritage, collaborative exercises are really important. And most importantly, if you have an idea for a project or an event, I'd say go and do it. The Next Gen is particularly always looking for individuals willing to head events and activities, because, you know, we are a volunteer board and we can only do so much. And for me, it was really fulfilling to do something that wasn't for school or for work. It was just something that I wanted to do. And I think it may be the thing that sets you apart when you're looking for a job is, you know, I organized this event and was really successful, and it shows that you're really interested and driven, and I definitely recommend it. And even just being part of ACO Next Gen and coming out to events just expands your network and exposes you to possible future employers. We are planning on doing another charrette, hopefully the second week of September. A similar structure, and hoping to do it with a site in the distillery in mind. And if you'd like to come out to our next event, we'd love to have you. I have some reports on the Next Gen activities. I don't know if I'll pass it out or if I'll just leave it for people to pick up. And most importantly, we have a Facebook page, and it's a really great way to stay connected to the group and see what's going on. And people periodically post just interesting events or tidbits about heritage, even if they're not our events, just something that we think is of interest. And thank you very much.
Yeah, stand, sit. Okay, so we have a little less than half an hour for questions and stuff. And so what I wanted to do is start out with a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So have we decided, are we sitting, standing? What are we going to do? You're going to stand in front, yes? Kyle made an executive decision. Excellent. And yeah, and no one's following you, Kyle. You have to answer all the questions yourself. So thank you, Al, for sharing your experiences today. I think we have mics behind us here.
Okay.
They're on? Yes. Okay. The first thing I wanted to ask, because this is a young professionals panel, is based on your experience or project that you talked about today, what is one piece of advice you would give to those new to the heritage field? And I know some of you talked about that in your presentation, so maybe those of you who didn't maybe address that, you can address this question. Who wants to go first? I can't see what you're doing.
I would say that talking, sharing stories, and listening is the best advice that I can give to anyone in heritage, young or old.
Yeah, mine's along that same thing, the collaboration and finding those trusted partners in your community.
Actually, just to add what I said, because I sort of echoed that sentiment as well. It's been said by many people before, but going outside and walking and exploring to sort of develop those questions that you want to ask. Since I've been here, many friendly people that I've seen walking up and down Main Street that have offered me lifts. And so what I'm doing is peculiar or if what I'm doing is unenjoyable. But so I've had a great time in Independence just this weekend, walking around, finding things, and finding unusual buildings and asking people about them. So not only going up to strangers and talking to strangers and asking them things, but finding those questions to ask and going out and exploring as well. And just because you think your neighborhood isn't walkable doesn't mean you shouldn't try to walk it. So.
I'll just add a couple more sentiments to that. I think it's all within the same vein, but again, networking. These conferences are a really great opportunity, and then using all of the people you meet here, keeping in touch, and it's access to a wide variety of resources. So for this bridge inventory in particular, I had to talk to many, many dozens of people, so it was very helpful to know some people and locate further resources.
In my study, I think I did a lot of research before I actually went out and did the field work, but when I did those countless hours out in the field and asked all those questions and really experienced what the pedestrian streetscape was while I was there, opened my eyes to a lot of different things and helped me really understand what was going on, which really added to the experience. And I think that really added to it. So it's really getting yourself in there, and you can read it, and you can learn it until you feel it and experience it. It's an animal that's really need to get into that.
I can't see if anyone else wants to be a victim up there. I'll move on to the next question. So based on the experience or project that you talked about today, what concrete actions would you like to see happen within the heritage field, and who do you think should be doing those actions? Come on, I gave you these last week. Didn't you?
I talked a little bit about making resources accessible, and I think that a lot of people are doing that at different levels, but I still had one property owner that believed that if they removed a plaque that a former property owner put on the building, that it would become dedesignated. So the education is still an ongoing quest. But my other comment would be to be making Heritage more proactive in their recognition of heritage resources. And the framework that we're working in right now is often reactive. I was fortunate in Bath that there's this great wealth of resources and information that had been previously completed and had previously identified resources that were important to the community, but not everywhere is as fortunate. So I'd like to see a more proactive heritage in the coming years.
I talked a bit about this during my presentation with interdisciplinarity, and Shannon mentioned this all of cross-field collaboration and seeing more of that. I just think it's really important to get different disciplines coming together. And I know at Carleton we can kind of exist in our silos a little bit. It was a challenge to figure out even who to get in touch to with the geography department, for example, and getting in touch with the history department and the architecture department. And yeah, it was a challenge, but I think it was important that we did that.
I think it's going to be important for municipalities to try to make sure there aren't as many underutilized spaces. So we talked about that a little bit yesterday with property standards, but also, like for instance, Guelph has a minor downtown activation grant, so it's would cover 30% of renovation costs for underutilized spaces. So that's something that we as an organization can also, like as a nonprofit, can also bring forward into negotiation and say, well, we can leverage this grant and apply for this together and aid the property owner in improving their space. So I'm not sure how many other communities have those types of opportunities, but it's been worthwhile for us even just in talking to property owners.
I think also another thing here is just really important is that groups encourage the sustainable aspects of heritage, because I think that attracts more people to the subject, and rather it just being pretty old buildings, that it's a movement, it's part of everything. I think that kind of opens it up to more people and more expertise.
Again, I can't see. Okay. I think some of you addressed this in this question that we just had. But what do you think the future issues in heritage will be? Looking to the future, what do you think those big challenges will be?
So yeah, I guess a lot of what I do sort of involves information, and increasingly there's a lot of great information online, and that's wonderful. And increasingly, a lot of us are going into professions that are information-based, and when things are available for free online, it's difficult to find a financial model to figure out who's paying these people who are information specialists. So some of I see one of the big challenges is going to be is what's happening to libraries and archives right now and the resources that we're getting access to. Because it's great that it seems like we're getting access to more information than ever before, but we're also getting a lot of cuts through libraries and archives. And I worry about not only about my professions and that, but also in terms of me as a researcher and what I'm able to get access to. And I think one of the big challenges is going to be how we treat the information age in an era where we're all trying to work with information, yet everyone is expecting information for free. And I certainly, just like many other people around the world, have a solution to that. But I think that's something we're definitely going to need to address with a lot of the resources that we have to make sure that what's available now continues to be available in a meaningful way in the future, and that people who are the experts in that, who can guide you through the mess of once everything's online, it's harder to find things because everything's there. So making sure that people are still able to find what they need to find in order to do the research that they need, in order to find to filter things out and know what's significant. So
I think heritage conservation is becoming increasingly litigious, and balancing the role of the community, the professional, and the decision maker, like the governmental body, is going to be something that we're going to be constantly negotiating through the rest of the future of heritage conservation. And I think it's going to be an ongoing struggle, and I think at one point, hopefully, optimistically, we'll find the right balance.
I've been really fascinated with the idea of marketing suburbia recently, and I think in a lot of places that don't have a lot of heritage value or downtown core, or have perhaps been separated from their downtown core for development needs to be tied back into it, or it might be the case of learning from heritage communities to establish a similar pattern of successful homes in Ontario. So I think that's going to be a big future issue.
This might sound weird given that we're all standing up here, and I see a lot of other young faces in the audience as well, but from the experience of the symposium, I think the challenge is to be getting more youth involvement and involvement from this generation, because I find that there's a lot of interest, and definitely my experience from the symposium, there was a lot of interest, but actually turning that interest into active involvement and actively engaging with the event and heritage more broadly is tricky. I mean, we had a hard time getting student volunteers, for example. I kind of resorted to taking my friend out for a drink and getting myself. You should help me out with it. Luckily, most of them did get roped into it. And we also kind of found that, with any event, there's going to be a certain amount of people that say they're going to come and then they don't actually show up. And the vast majority of those for us were students. So we kind of got on the right track, I think, with our call for papers. So we tried to pick a topic that would be engaging to young people. Like technology is a really popular thing to talk about symposiums these days, and a lot of the new generation, I think, is interested in that. So that was kind of one step we took, and hopefully we'll keep on improving next year with our event.
Actually, I think that one of the big future challenges in my particular study would be to change the mindsets of the people that were living in these communities in terms of heritage and seeing those resources, because I think they have a lot of bad experiences, and I'd like to see the reputations of those communities change. But you can do things in the short term, like enact bylaws, carbon standards bylaws, but that reputation and that greatness in people's mindset might still be there for a long time. So really changing that and getting the arts community in there and injecting life into those areas is really the key. A lot of work, but I think it can happen, and it's just a slow progress.
And one more addition, and this is quite broad and it's been touched on throughout the presentations today, but I think just collaboration in general is quite key. We all know a lot about a little bit of things, but if we can all combine forces together, whether that's in education, linking architecture and planning students together, or different volunteer organizations and professional groups, if we can all combine forces together, that's a lot more useful, valuable information. And I feel like the ultimate goal is all towards conservation, but we all might have different agendas and come at it in different ways. So sharing these resources and collaborating for the ultimate conservation of Ontario and Canada's resources is an ultimate goal we should work toward.
Thank you, everybody. We'll open it up to questions. We have a little less than 15 minutes, I think. Andrew, you're like first out of the gate back there.
It's been acknowledged that the heritage sector has had some demographic challenges. That the demographic of the heritage sector in Ontario and Canada has been older, not perhaps as diverse in terms of ethnic origin, class, etc. Other arts and culture sectors, though, are much more diverse and have many more young people. If you look at the world of theater, dance, visual art, even where people are struggling financially, there's still people involved in a lot of these groups. So I guess my question to any and all of the panelists is, what would your suggestions be for strengthening the connections, the mutual interests between the heritage sector and other arts and culture sectors that may already be a lot further along towards the goal of a really, really diverse base than perhaps our sector is at the moment?
I would like to answer that, actually. I find that we take the landscape really for granted. I grew up somewhere like it in the city of Hamilton where I was able to see the changing landscape over time. I lived in a heritage home and I had parents that tuned me into it. But because it's a backdrop sometimes for some people, they do things, they do these, like you said, these activities in old buildings that sometimes they maybe take that for granted. So you have to tune them into it. And I find that even speaking to people and really encouraging that appreciation for it spreads like wildfire, and you can really turn people onto it. And I think that's what I try to do, and I think that's what everyone else on this panel tries to do, and that's probably what you also try to do. But I think that's the most important, and that's the first step. And I think I try to go from there, and really excited to see where it goes from there.
Can I answer this question? I wasn't on the panel, but I think, and I said it last year, but I think it bears repeating, is if we want people to come to us, we also have to go to them. You can't just sit here and wait for people to come to you. I sit on the board of an environmental organization, and I also sit on the board of the ACO, and I think that that is really key. I do love heritage, I do it for my job, I also do it for volunteer, but I don't just operate in a silo. I go out and meet them, and that's really heightened their heritage. They are in a heritage building, but yeah, we didn't have historical signs up before I started there, so.
I'd also just like to add, I think one thing you have to remember also is that heritage is not necessarily as old as you think it is, and I think it's something that younger people who are more curious about, say, the 1970s. It's something that I don't necessarily get from the Devonson Historical Society, who remember the 1970s quite well. So for me, trying to figure out who Canadian pop celebrities were from the 1970s who have no longer lasted is fascinating, or finding out about these multicultural organizations. Yes, my area in the Junction is from the late 19th century. We also have the only known Maltese neighborhood really in North America, in my neighborhood. And there are all these great people who've been living there since the 1960s, and that was never on the walking tours that the Junction was already doing. And there's this vibrant Maltese community in and around different parts of Toronto. There used to be a second one downtown that sort of collapsed into ours. And being able to involve those groups, we haven't always necessarily thought about the immigration patterns that happen now. Some of the most diverse communities within the Toronto area are even in Toronto. There are places like Brampton and different suburbs where people are moving. And I think heritage groups sort of need to recognize some of those international groups that have come in and sort of saying, this is heritage too. Heritage isn't just Victorian housing. It's modern architecture, and it's these people, many of whom are still alive, but whose story is important about the changing nature of heritage and how our communities have changed.
I'm going to answer that one too, sorry. From my perspective, at least, my answer is kind of two separate things, but heritage as venue, yes, sometimes people take it for granted, but I'd actually almost like you to comment on what you experienced in Buffalo last summer, where they used grain silos for a big, huge sort of arts one-night festival kind of thing, and you were allowed to take a drink around the building, like something a little more grassroots, not so it doesn't necessarily have to be finely planned and fine-tuned kind of entertainment. It could just be a band in an empty building, and I think that really attracts youth in arts, at least. Yeah, it attracts me. So the other thing too is we kind of have that struggle a little bit, at least with the arts boards. Like, they're not necessarily always young boards, and that's maybe just reflective of Guelph and that area. But we found that people get really nervous about joining a board because it's a lot of commitment and time, and they can foresee that. And even committees sometimes too, but they are more than willing to host an event and let us sponsor them without even providing funding. So like, they'll just basically want the opportunity to access our network, our membership through our newsletter, our Facebook group, and we can promote their event, and they'll let us have signage and just kind of support each other that way. So mutual marketing, I guess, is like what I've been calling it, but I find that really helps to engage younger groups in the city who don't necessarily, they have their other, their own things going on. They're not necessarily looking to get involved in a more concrete and long-term way, but the short terms are very attractive. So.
David, you had a question?
As a member of that demographic that's been so subtly referred to, I'm really encouraged to see the enthusiasm and the variety that you young people have become involved with in the heritage field. That's terrific. We had, and maybe some of you know this young lady, Amanda Sherrington, I don't know. She volunteered with us in the Simcoe County Board branch the other day, literally the other day, and I gave her 2 or 3 things she might think of, and within 2 seconds, she'd done it, and come up with websites and ideas and so on, and I was just totally flummoxed, and I said, this is all good to me, you're going to have to carry through this that you suggested, but that enthusiasm is terrific, and I really encourage it, and by the sounds of it, you've had that effect already. But I do have a question, and that is that, actually for David, but maybe others too, you mentioned that you had sent people out into the high schools, and I've tried to encourage that kind of activity, but have met with certain opposition to the schools.
Really?
And I wonder how you approached that, and what you actually did, and what the result was.
Okay. Again, that was one of the first projects I was involved in. As it happens, we were lucky, one of the teachers from my actually old high school teachers is a woman named Rose Steinmeier, who's an excellent high school history teacher. Amongst other things, she is involved in a project in Toronto called Her Streets Cafe, which is specifically a women's history group that hosts a lot of great public events. And she took some time off and started a course for the Ontario curriculum. I believe it's called Archives and Local History. And that was something that she was able to get going, specifically at Humberside Collegiate, which is the school in the Junction. So that certainly gave us a lot of opportunities that we really had a teacher there who was very interested in that process. I don't really know that we met that much opposition. I think we started trying to go that way through history classes, but eventually we decided, why don't we actually go to the arts classes and say, we'll just give you the material. And a lot of that really just meant phoning, emailing, or dropping by the local schools and saying, are any of these teachers interested? And at one school, it was the drama teacher. At another school, it was the fine art teacher. And again, at Humberside, it was specifically the history teacher, because she was interested in that. And she was trying to write at this time, I think she was still trying to work on that curriculum of coming up with, like, how do we get kids working with primary resources and learning about their own community as well. So this was something that we were able to. I know it's difficult since I snuck in just before the Ontario curriculum change, and I know that before Mike Harris changed how history is taught in high schools, and now things, I think I get the sense there's less flexibility in some of the curriculum and what they can do if you're trying to teach towards these exams. But this is certainly something where there's you absolutely come in and give us this material, and this is an opportunity for the kids to apply the skills that they've been learning in history. So I'm interested in talking afterwards about sort of what opposition you've encountered, because it's not like every single teacher welcomed us into their classroom, but at every school we went to, we were able to find someone who just their face lit up and said, oh, this is a great opportunity to do something, and they were really happy that there were people there who were willing to sort of, again, do that work and give them the lesson plan, essentially. So yeah, I'd be interested in talking to you afterwards, certainly.
I sense a topic for a blog post.
Apparently, yeah.
Yes. I'll post it on the ACO Facebook page once you write it. Now you're committed. You have to. We have time for one more question. I saw a hand back here. Yes? Yeah? Sorry, I'm not sure your name.
Thank you. I've actually really enjoyed all your presentations today. Thank you for that. And I have to say I'm encouraged by a lot of the variety of projects that our if I can use that generation is involved in. But one thing I've noticed, especially maybe it's just this group, is a lot of these projects are taking place in larger cities. And I work as a heritage planner in Coburg, but I'm also involved in the Historical Society there. And when I first joined that group, I was invited to be part of the programs committee, and which I'm currently now very involved with. But the next oldest member on this committee is 72. And through my role as a heritage planner, I know that there are younger people, especially now, moving to Coburg and moving back to Coburg and purchasing heritage homes and business, setting up businesses in the heritage district. And yet our historical society seems to have difficulty engaging that demographic. And my question, I guess, is maybe more for Lindsay or possibly Kyle. I'm wondering, both of your projects had a bit of a municipal slant to them as well. And I'm wondering if, did you notice that there was interest or engagement from younger people in more, if I can use the term where you were working, rural areas or smaller cities and towns? Or did you actively try to engage that demographic in areas that are not, as urban and where that demographic is already smaller?
Sure, I'll start with that. Unfortunately, due to the scope of the work and the type of information we were requesting from municipalities, we were primarily dealing with heritage planners and engineers, public works staff, so there wasn't really any youth involvement, even from volunteers. But one positive aspect was that we were able to hire a summer experience student and a co-op student, so we were able to engage youth in a very hands-on way throughout the entire project. So that was a great way to kind of showcase what a heritage bridge is, what history is, and introduce them to the culture of the entire watershed and the history of the watershed. They actually wrote a huge chunk of the history section of that report. So that was great, but in terms of hands-on youth involvement, that wasn't, there wasn't really very much.
Kyle, you have 1 minute.
Okay. A lot of this country is rural, and has a lot of small villages, so I completely understand some of your struggles and constraints. One thing that is a benefit is that it's not that far from Kingston, and it's very affordable. So it's attracting a lot of new people into the village who may or may not know about the history. There's still sort of some of the old original families. There's a lot of new people coming. So as a part of the process, we sent a letter of invitation to every person in the village and inviting them to one of our open houses. We had 2 in total. And that was a really good way to sort of introduce them to the history and heritage of the village of Bath. And I think that is starting to get some momentum because there are new people coming into the village. Like David said, there's new blood, and that helps. And it takes time and consciousness. And I think that's something that's building in that, and hopefully throughout Loyalist Country.
Well, I'm sure some of you still have other questions, and I'm sure our panelists would love to answer them during the short break, so I'm sure they'll be around or in the hall. But I wanted to thank all of our panelists for putting together their 5-minute presentation and trying to keep it as succinct as possible. Some of them are very large projects, but I think they captured the spirit well. And I wanted to also thank all of you guys for coming. I think it's very telling that this panel continues to be very well attended at every conference, and particularly with our huge variety of presenters.